The Basidiomycota, fungi with septate mycelium and sexual spores that are produced externally on the cell. So we can see a little bit of difference in between the Ascomycota and the Basidiomycota here. When we start out, down in the corner I've got this little diagram, and what it shows is it shows these two little spores which were originally haploid. One was green and one was red. They started growing, they came in contact with each other, they fused, the hyphae fused, and what you got was dikaryotic hyphae that now has one green and one red nucleus in it. So rather than being haploid, we now have dikaryotic, which means that you've got two haploid nuclei, one from each parent in the same cell. When we talk about the Basidiomycota, we're going to look at things where the sexual spores are produced externally to the cell. And in that particular case, the most common thing you're going to find is a mushroom. And if you look at it, you've seen mushrooms before, and they've got a lot of different shapes and everything like that. And one of the interesting parts of the gills up on top and the gills on the side of the gills is where we're going to find the sexual spores being produced. So if we take that and we section it, this is a section of a gill, and you can see that on the outside or outer parts of this, it's kind of different. And that is the area that has what we call the hymenium, or the fertile layer. And on that, you're going to find the production of basidia, which are going to produce basidiospores. This is what your format looks like. Your mycelium goes, it divides, and finally it gets to a spot where a single cell is produced on the end. It is dikaryotic again. And in that particular cell, what you're going to get is you're going to get the formation, the two of them coming together. And as they come together, you get the diploid phase. Then it is going to undergo meiosis. And as it undergoes meiosis, you get separation. Now, I've labeled these a little bit. So the green one now has a little bit of red on it, and the red one has a little bit of green on it. And we now have 4 individual haploid spores start to make the little spores up on top. The nuclei migrate onto the inside of it, and we now have 4 basidiospores on the top. These are released in a lot of different ways, and we're not going to get into that in this particular forum. If we look at this, and I've superimposed that particular drawing onto this section of a gill, and what you can see is in the center, we've got a cell that's sticking up. You can see the 4 little tiny, what we call sterigma, and 4 cells up on top of it, the 4 basidiospores up on top of it. And the part sticking up is the basidium, and you've got the basidiospores on the top of it, which are haploid. When you have a mushroom like that, it can produce millions or tens of millions of these, depending on the size of the mushroom. Here's another picture. And what you see is you see the little hat-like area, and you've got the 2 little sterigma, and you can see the spores attached on the top of it. There's a difference between the haploid part and the diploid part and the dikaryon. The basidiospores are haploid, the mycelium is dikaryotic, and it's only at that one little spot in there at a very short period of time that you've actually got the diploid phase occurring. Now, these are just representatives of different kinds of mushrooms. This is a chanterelle. It is actually this yellow color. It's a very pretty thing. Fine edible mushrooms, and you can see the lamina on it where the lamina are kind of bent around, and they look like that. This is a mushroom, and you can see it's got an attachment down into the soil. These normally grow in the soil. They spend a lot of time growing in the soil before you actually get the formation of the mushroom up on top. This is your common mushroom that we put on food and everything. And these are very nice mushrooms, excellent source of available protein. This is a rather bizarre group. This is called the bird's nest fungi. Starts out with these little egg shapes. These little egg shapes are kind of tiny. They're about the diameter of a pencil. When they open up, they become about the diameter of a dime. On the inside of it, you can see, if you look on the one on the left-hand side, a little bit above the middle, you see what looks like a bunch of little birds' eggs inside of this little bird's nest. And each one of those eggs is filled with basidia and basidiospores. These are very common on moist soil, and they're really kind of cute. You can see that they form in groups. This is a puffball. It's about golf ball size. Some of these are edible, some of them are not. So you have to be very careful to make sure you know what you're doing before you ever try and consume any of these things. This is an earth star. It's kind of like the puffball, but in this case, the outer peel of it bends backwards, and as it bends backwards, it pulls the center part up. Drop of rainwater comes down, hits the outer part of it, it sends a puff of spores out the center. This is a giant puffball. This giant puffball, and I call it a giant puffball because it was about 4 inches across. It was rather large and, and significant. This is what we call Pisolithus tinctorius. It's a closed up type puffball, and what you can see is the little chambers on the inside of it, and each one of those chambers is filled with basidia and basidiospores. This particular fungus is used with pine trees because it forms mycorrhizal fungi with them. This is a nasty looking one. This is what we call a stinkhorn. You can smell these things at about 10 feet away. They really produce this absolutely disgusting smell. It smells like decaying flesh. And what it does is it actually attracts insects to land on the upper part. They take the spores away and they disseminate the spores. And again, you see these things coming up, but in reality, what's happening is it's growing underground for a long period of time, getting all the nutrients and energy it needs to be able to form these things almost overnight. This is one that was in my backyard. It looked like orange styrofoam. The center part has got this spore mass which really smelled bad. So when we look at the Basidiomycota, we see a lot of variation in there. Think common mushroom, think organism that has mycelium. The mycelium is made out of chitin, septate mycelium, spores being produced external to the cell that produces them. Very large group of fungi, very diverse group of fungi, and some of these things, like I said, are quite large in size. Other ones may be kind of tiny.